was July of 2010. 101st Airborne Division had sent a company of its paratroopers in on an air assault mission along with 60 Afghan military personnel. They were sent into the Marawara Valley, which is in the Kunar province, which sits right up against the Pakistan border, with the mission to take a specific town through which the Taliban were using to funnel troops and personnel and conduct operations elsewhere in Afghanistan. The people in charge decided that that was something that was important to shut down. So they come flying in early in the morning. They expected several dozen Taliban fighters because the intelligence had told them that that was there. And so they had plenty of equipment, personnel, and everything they needed to take care of the mission. The intent was, after they had taken this particular area, they were going to put the Afghan police in charge of a defensive perimeter so that they could maintain that gains, and so they would permanently cut off the Taliban's areas there, their routes in. Well, it didn't work out as expected, like often happens in military operations. The plan doesn't survive first contact, and that was the case here. Instead of several dozen Taliban, it turned out that there was about 250. And the fighting continued on hours, and now all of a sudden they don't have as much equipment as they thought. But then the heat turns up, both physically and rhetorically, and the Afghan military, who'd been trained for about 4 years up to that point and had trained with the Americans, decided they'd had enough and left. Literally just abandoned the battlefield and moved back to where they were no longer in the fire. Well, the Americans were pretty pissed off, as you might guess, but being American troopers that they are, they don't care how hard the mission is. They're going to continue to fight until they succeed. And sure enough, overnight they had got some reinforcements, both Afghan special forces and other American troops, and by the next morning they had actually accomplished the situation. They had attained the objective, and the Taliban had been routed and sent out. Now, it came pretty expensive for the Americans. There was, I believe there was 3 killed at that time and 15 wounded, and 1 Afghan that was killed before they stopped fighting. But we still have the objective, so now then we're going to bring in the Afghan police, and we're not just going to throw them out there. We actually brought in prefabricated defensive positions so that they were fully outfitted. They had communications gear, they had electronics communications, they had cameras so that they could see, in the dark, and they were set up with everything that you could have. After about a month, our troops left and handed them off in about as good a shape as it's even possible to be out there. However, almost immediately, rumors started spreading that the Taliban were going to come back in force and seek revenge on all of those who had been fighting against them. The power of the rumor alone caused the Afghan police to abandon the battlefield. They literally left everything behind. They took whatever they could, whatever we had given them, and the Taliban came back and did not retake it militarily. They just walked back and came into the position, and then it was as though we had never been there. It's very much the same as if I have a bucket of water and I have a powerful fist and I'm going to drive that fist into the water. The water is completely helpless. It can do nothing to stop my fist until I pull my fist out. At that point, the water goes back to where it was before, and you can never tell that the fist was ever there. Now, that was a tactical situation. On an operational level, what we used to call RC East, Regional Command East, which was Kunar and several other provinces over there, which was one of the primary objectives of our operations in Afghanistan during the Obama surge especially, it's the same situation on a little larger schedule. So I spent actually quite a bit of time in the Kunar area, and after we left, and I believe it was 2014, 2015, when most of our troops left, and we handed the situation, or the battle space off to the Afghan military, they abandoned everything except for 2 bases. And I have a friend of mine, an Afghan friend of mine, who still lives in the area. I confirmed, he texted me just this morning, and told me that basically the Afghan troops occupied 2 of the bases. They don't conduct operations from there, they merely occupy it. They can't drive there, they can't reinforce it, they can't feed their people, they can't bring ammunition, fuel, water, they have to bring it in with a helicopter. So literally they have 2 dots in that whole area, which was an entire division command area before that, and he said that it's as though you were never there. This morning, he reinforces that. It's as though we were never there. On the strategic level, it will be the same when we leave Afghanistan as though we were never there. No matter what we want to say we want to have accomplished, at the end of the day, whether that's next Tuesday whether that's 6 months from now, 6 years from now, 60 years from now, if we want to be that foolish. When we leave, and it's a when, not an if, Afghanistan will become back to what it was, what it naturally is going to be. And that's one of the things that I just want to reinforce so much. And as the Colonel mentioned here, it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, at all. It's going to be the same. As long as you have American troops on the ground, that fist in the bucket, there is none of these, organizations or terror groups that have no militaries. They don't have any Air Force. They don't have a Navy. They don't have all these things. They can do nothing to prevent us from having our fist in that bucket. But we're not going to keep our fist in that bucket because it's not in American interest to do so. We are not preventing any terrorist strikes from happening in the United States because of our troops in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, the operations in Yemen, Africa, all of these places. They are merely tactical activity. The military can't accomplish every one of these missions you send us after, and it will have no impact on your security in the United States. I cannot reiterate that strongly enough. Our security is not ensured here because of troops on the ground over there. That is the biggest fallacy that I think has come out of the whole so-called war on terror. Our security is prevented or is taken care of by our very robust ISR strike, what's called intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and the ability to strike targeted enemies who may specifically want to attack the United States. We must keep ourselves safe. We should keep ourselves safe from any terrorist attempt wherever it may arise. And we have to protect ourselves on a daily basis, whether it's in elsewhere in Africa where we don't have troops, whether in Pakistan where we don't have combat troops deployed, or anywhere else in the world. We have to keep ourselves safe everywhere. But we do keep ourselves safe with this ISR strike and a good cooperation between federal, state, and local law enforcement officials. That's what has stopped scores of potential terrorist strikes throughout the years since 9/11. And that's what's going to continue to keep us safe forward. All we do is we lose American blood and American treasure, and we deny ourselves the ability to actually prepare for potential existential fights that may actually need to be fought someday for our security. We weaken our national security by these forces. We do not help it. And that's the primary thing that I want to get across to you. We do not increase our security. We actually diminish it by staying here. And we really do need to shut these down in a responsible way, and that will help our country enormously. Thank you. I would actually build on to that. And I've actually heard it floated around by a number of my colleagues actually prior to the last election, is that they would like to see a situation where the commander-in-chief says, okay, there is, depending on how you want to count, roughly 9 undeclared wars right now, military operations where we're carrying on that have not been authorized. Take every one of those and say, all right, in order, in sequence, give them to Congress. If Congress really does believe that they are in the national interest and that they are necessary for our security, then let them vote and the operation will continue. If they don't, then the operation will shut down. Now, of course, in my opinion, there's very strong, compelling evidence that none of them would pass that muster. Because if you're going to have a military operation, part of that calculation must be, and how do we end this? The classic ends, ways, and means. What is the end state? How do we even achieve it? And right now, those don't even exist for Afghanistan, and certainly not for Syria or in Iraq. They're just there, and anywhere in Africa that you want to talk about. They just exist to conduct tactical operations. But there's not even the possibility, there's nothing even articulated that would ever tell the American people, here's how we'll know when this wins. When these conditions are met, then we know we have success. And if you can't articulate that, and if you can't even start the first one, which is, why is this in the American national interest? Why do we need, and that's the word that has to be applied, why do we need to conduct these military operations for our security? If you can't answer that one or the last one, they must end. And I've heard it said recently, and certainly it seems to be the case, that that the Congress seems to be many years typically behind what the American people actually think. And we've seen poll after poll by different organizations that show the overwhelming and growing belief that what we're saying represents what the most Americans actually believe and think too. And if we can just bring those two together a little quicker, then I think it would be benefit for the whole country. Yeah, I think that there's something even more fundamental necessary before even any of those things should even be contemplated, and that's that we need a change of mentality. We barely escaped thinking that we won the Cold War and that we were now obligated or due to kind of lord it over everybody else before 9/11 happened, and then we got thrown into this fear matrix to where we were afraid of everything, and the only solution is to send combat troops everywhere. And that just became a default situation. And when you had the Iraq surge and you had the Afghan surge, and we have not broken out of that mindset right now. And so it just almost is like a default where we have to have troops overseas to keep us safe. What we have to do, first of all, is penetrate that and realize, no, actually, we don't. We have a tremendous military capability, nuclear and conventional, that will keep us safe from virtually any threat that could arise today. And we have a good ISR strike to defend ourselves very effectively from terrorist attacks, no matter where they may come from. We have to realize we don't need those troops over there. That's not even keeping us safe, much less do we need to. Once we can come to the realization that that doesn't keep us safe, now then you can address a whole new realm of things and say, hey, what we need to do is focus on how are we going to benefit our country? Clearly, economic and diplomatic engagement is far more beneficial and helpful to our country than the barrel of the gun, leading with the barrel of the gun first. That's the worst way to do it. So if we can have a change of mentality, then that and many other things become possible.